People are rolling in now. Hi, Susie G. Hi, Angela, Carol, Geraldine, Gina, Stacy, Elizabeth, Kylie, Jack, B. Parsons, which we think is Brad Parsons, Amy Zinman, Susan, Megan, and Merrill. And new to the party is Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Caitlin, you tell me when we should start.
Well, let's go ahead and get rolling. You know, you and me will talk for a few minutes and give some more people to show up before Rachel really gets going. So let's get this party started.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Fabio Fernandez, and I'm the director of Greenwich House Pottery. I am in a small office with my colleague Jenny, so we are being responsible. Here's Jenny in the background. We are being responsible and masking and socially spacing. Some of you may know a lot about Greenwich House Pottery. Some of you may not. Some of you come to us through Rachel's extensive network of friends and families and artists and curators and educators that she is highly regarded among. So to you, I will tell you a little bit about the pottery. We were founded in 1909 as Greenwich House, and we were a settlement school. We provided all sorts of social services and job training for immigrants, recent immigrants, and to others in the community. And over time, we evolved to have a variety of different program areas. So Greenwich House has a methadone treatment clinic, a variety of senior centers, music school, and other programs. And the pottery is one of the programs of Greenwich House. And here at the pottery, we have three main program areas, the three legs of our stool. We have classes and workshops throughout the year. We have an exhibition program in a very fine exhibition gallery where we organize and curate 6 exhibitions a year related to ceramics and ceramics in the expanded field. And the reason we're here today is our residency program. So Greenwich House offers time and space to makers, and some of these makers are very experienced in working with clay. Some of them want to try clay and have technical guidance and assistance as they make in clay. And this is what Rachel Farmer has been doing for the last several months. It's a competitive process to apply, and she was awarded this residency. And we're so pleased that she spent the last couple months with us. And I'm so curious to hear more about her work and her life. But I will turn it over to our curator and residency manager, Caitlin Mcclure.
Thanks, Fabio. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Mcclure, the gallery and residency manager. I'm also at work, so I'm wearing a mask. So wave wildly if I'm too hard to hear. But it's been a real pleasure to have Rachel working with us. She's been a fellow here from the beginning of June through the end of August. This is her last week with us. We're very sorry to see her go. But a big thank you to her and to all of you for being here today for the talk. I'm going to quickly tell you a little bit about Rachel and then pass the microphone over to her so she can show you her work. But so Rachel is an artist who uses ceramics and quilts to re-examine histories that get passed down through families, institutions, and pop culture, such as the mythology of the American West and her own Mormon pioneer ancestry with a queer feminist bent. She has an MFA from the School of Art of the Art Institute of Chicago and a BFA from Brigham Young University. She's had exhibitions at Prairie Arts, the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art, and Air Gallery. She's also been an artist in residence at Bush Creek Arts and the Museum of Arts and Design. So without any further ado, oh, no, that's not true. A few ground rules I forgot to talk about. Let's all stay on mute while Rachel is giving her presentation. And then after Rachel gives her presentation, we'll open the floor up. And if you have questions for her, please feel free to unmute yourself, or you can chat your question in the box if you don't want to speak yourself, and I'll ask your question out loud. Now, without further ado, Rachel, please take over.
Hi, thank you, everybody. I'm going to add one more thing. I've taught on Zoom all last year. I kind of hate chat going while we're going, so just please don't use chat and just save all questions to the end. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. The very first thing I want to do is I want to thank you all for being here. I know it's the middle of summer. There's a lot of other things you could be doing with your time, so I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I also want to thank Fabio, Caitlin, Jenny, Taylor, Hannah, Susie, Kiani, Kara Jean, Deb, Ching, Lou, Megan, and the entire Greenwich House Pottery community for being amazingly just welcoming me, being so supportive. It's been a really, really hard pandemic year. I did not make much of anything over the year. I made one video, which I'm really happy about, but that was it. And to have this be my kind of return to my studio practice has been like the best possible place. So just thank you. All right, I'm gonna be talking for about somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes. I've got a ton of slides I'm gonna be showing. There'll be a little bit of back and forth where I'll show something and then I'll kind of come back, and then I'm gonna kind of share another screen because I'm gonna be going between some web images and some slides and some video. At the end of it, yeah, that's when we're going to have questions. So feel free if you want to go off camera. No one will be looking, so you don't have to be on camera unless you really want to. So without any further ado, let me start. Okay, so I'm going to start with sharing. I think most of you have seen an image, one or more images of my artwork. So I'm actually going to do something I've never done before, is I'm actually going to share some source images. I talk about like, oh, I get ideas from pop culture, from this or that, but like, what in the world am I talking about? So I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 1972. So the 70s and 80s was my childhood. So some of you will recognize the imagery and some of you will like, whoa, what is this? So this is kind of just a little bit of an intro before I show you my artwork. So for anyone who doesn't know Holly Hobbie, Holly Hobbie was a character which I didn't realize. I always thought it was like a Western kind of like girl, but it actually was invented by somebody in Maine. But it's an old timey kind of Euro-American sunbonneted girls that when I was a kid in the 70s, crazy popular. I had the Holly Hobbie slow bake oven, which was a thing. I had the coloring book, I had the stickers. So if anybody want to know, people wonder where the bonnets come from. A lot of people are like, oh, it comes from The Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, whoa, okay, I know that's a current references, but actually like it goes way back. I mean, it is a utilitarian sunbonnet, but then within pop culture, it actually goes way back. So that's one source image. Another source image, when I was a kid, the Laura Ingalls Wilder, The Little House on the Prairie, was on TV. I love to watch it and ridicule it for being inaccurate. Yeah, so that was my childhood pastime. Yeah, there's so many problems with the show. I could go on and on, but there's actually some really good books that talk about this. Well, first of all, there are a couple of novels that have come out recently that talk about, well, this talks about, you know, the theft, alcoholism, violence that was part of Laura Ingalls Wilder's childhood. And actually there's a beautiful book that just won the Pulitzer Prize a year or two ago, Prairie Fires, which really puts her life in context with greater American history. And it's a really fantastic book and really, really grueling look at kind of American history. So I really recommend anybody to read that. But in terms of source imagery, yes, these images were like all over television when I was a kid. So this was kind of the look at what, you know, like pioneer or settler life was like. Another kind of pop, you know, culture, you know, mythology, iconography Madonna of the Prairie. This has been out there since like the 1923. It was the cover of a novel called Covered Wagon. So it's this very, very passive look at, like, using this Christian imagery. She's got this halo and she's just sitting there in the covered wagon doing nothing. So this is a very, very typical, and I'm just gonna say there isn't a lot of, I've been to a lot of art museums across the US looking for images of this kind of time period, and they are just like the Western kind of TV shows and movies, they are completely male dominated. So the few kind of like women that do appear are often these very kind of passive women. So going a little bit more to like history for a second. Oregon Trail, I think most people know about the Oregon Trail, so I'm not going to go into it, but something important, this is from the History Channel, most Oregon Trail pioneers didn't settle in Oregon. There are about 400,000 people who went along the trail, but about 80,000 ended up in Oregon, 250 ended up in California, and this is my family, about 70,000 people ended up in Utah. And the National Park Service actually runs a National Historic Trail for all of the trails, and they do overlap for quite a bit, and then they kind of like veer off. So very specifically the Mormon Pioneer Trail. So this is most sides of my family, not all, but most. And just to give you a sense of, they were going from Illinois, they were actually I'm gonna go like this so I can see one person. They were, long story, I'm not gonna go into the whole story, but basically kicked out by angry mobs from Ohio, then Missouri, and then finally Illinois. And they were trying to get the hell out of the United States. Just so you know, when they went to this area, which is now Utah, it was part of Mexico. And they were trying to get out because they had been met with angry mobs everywhere they've gone. And then within a year, there was the Mexican-American War, and it became part of the United States. So a year later, they were part of the United States again. But just is an interesting thing is like they were actually trying to escape the United States when they went out west. In terms of my family, I will share more in a little bit, but this is, the Mormon Church actually keeps this huge database. This is James Farmer, from England, my great-great-grandfather. He was 27 and he left June 3rd, 1853, a little bit different. This is pretty much after 1858, everyone coming to Utah were European immigrants. So he was coming from England, and people were coming with him from England, from Denmark, from Scandinavia, from Sweden, and it was a 3-month journey about. So they left June 3rd and they arrived September 26th. I will come back more to his story in a minute, but I want to show you just in terms of like iconography, because I feel like you're going to understand my work a lot better. My family didn't participate in this, but there were people, it was a very specific Mormon thing where they took handcarts. Handcarts were used by European peddlers for a long time. So it was something that was like known, that you could, carry stuff around. But Mormon pioneers came up with this really cheap way for like people who didn't have a lot of money. Is like, hey, instead of like renting a wagon, just bring all your belongings in the handcart. So there were about 3,000 people who did that. It worked out most of the time, except in 1856, there were about 200 people that died because they got caught in a snowstorm. I'm telling you all this because I grew up with pioneer sculptures, big monuments. Just like most monuments in the United States, there are a lot of problematic things about these sculptures, these monuments. So I'm just gonna like say that right away. One thing that is interesting is there's this real kind of trauma with kind of the Mormon Exodus, but at this point, it's kind of fetishized in this really weird way. So I grew up in this kind of almost fetishizing this kind of martyrdom. So there's like these sculptures like that I grew up with like all over. And it's also interesting to me again, is like, what is the woman doing? It's like, you have the the man pulling it, you have the boy behind it, and the woman is kind of like putting her hand on the cart, kind of looking at the kid. So she's not really doing a lot. So again, kind of this passive look. So one more thing I'm going to show you, and you'll understand more in a minute, the Avon white porcelain nativity set. I have always been fascinated by really kitschy ceramic figurines. I had a lot when I was a kid. A lot of people that I knew collected little ceramic figurines, so they play a large part in my childhood. And I'm really interested in the nativity set because we had a couple of them when I was a kid. And it's like this really intense, you know, Christian religious iconography, but you can play with it, right? You can pick it up, you can move it around, and me and my 2 brothers and 2 sisters would play with it nonstop. It was like, let's put Jesus over here. No, we'll put him over there. Oh, we'll put Mary here. And so this idea of like playing with like really loaded imagery is something that shows up in my work. So that is enough to kind of get you all started. And now I'm going to share, oh, there's one more thing. I'm going to share a childhood photo. This is me as a kid, Provo, Utah. And I also grew up on the edge of town. This is now all completely suburban at this point. It's all filled in. But when I was a kid, it was big, beautiful fields and beautiful mountains. And I love the Western landscape more than almost anything in the whole world. So I just wanted to kind of like show you that like this is like the origin story. And that's my uncle kind of showing again, like where our house was. And there was always this tension as a kid because basically starting at the age of 7, they like filled it in, all these houses started to go up. And I hated it. I was like, how dare you like, you know, create concrete over this beautiful land. And then there was a moment when I finally realized like, oh, that's what my family had done, right? So there was this tension. And then I was like, oh, I wish I could go back in time and like live before, you know, but then I was like, when in back in time, like, do I want to be a pioneer woman who shows up in 1848? Like, hell no, you know, like horrible life. Like, I don't want to do that. And then like before that, like my people weren't here, you know, it was indigenous, it was Shoshone, Ute, Paiute, Goshute, Navajo. That's who the land, you know, who had lived in land for hundreds and thousands of years. So there's always been this tension in me about loving a land and also recognizing, you know, kind of what my people had done to the land. So this goes to my art. So you can see the first kind of piece that I made in this series, I've been working on kind of, you know, playing with history, I call it, playing with my past, playing with Western American iconography for the past, I guess since 2009, it's about 12 years now. And it all started with this desire to kind of play with that big sculpture that I'd shown you, that big kind of, so taking that image, but making it only women, making them, I call them my little kind of like ancestral ghost figurines, little ancestor spirits, and going out west and actually going on the trail and taking photos. But it was like a photo video series. And then they end up in, so this is actually in Wyoming, right? This is along the original Mormon, California, Oregon Trail, but it's now been paid over. It's like a freeway now. And then they end up in Utah, and this is like another big pioneer monument full of men. And then this is literally down the street from where I grew up. This is like, so this was my field, like my childhood field that I grew up in. And then they end up in the parking lot. So it's this kind of like, look again of like what had happened, you know. And what I want to say is like, there's all this imagery that I grew up with, and part of me is like trying to play with this imagery, trying to make sense of it, but it's always, I call it, it's always very poetic. It's not literal. I'm not writing a nonfiction book about it. My brother did. I will share that later. But so I often like, there's lots of meaning behind this. This is actually, I call it like ancestors traversing church parking lot, because it's the church parking lot that I went to. And I feel like there's layers of different meaning that you can get with this one piece. But I'm actually going to stop for a second because there's a video that I made that kind of alongside it, that's got a little bit more of the feel. Actually, I mean, I like both of them. I like both the photos and the video. I just think they have a little bit different feel to them. I'm not going to play it 6 minutes. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I just want to show you. I forgot to share sound. Give me 1 second. Thanks for being patient. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to kind of skim through the beginning. They start at Independence Rock and they do nothing. They just sit there, but everything else is moving around them. And then this is, I can't remember the name of it, Devil's Rock in Wyoming. And then this is where I'll just start for a second. So I'll say from the first time I conceived this idea, like that's what I wanted. That's the shot I wanted. Like I wanted like these little ghost figures next to what was the trail and is now this freeway. Again, that sense of like what was, what is, and the sense of journeying and like what has become of the American West landscape. And then they go again to Salt Lake City. And then I'll just kind of forward, they end up again in my hometown. Again, that's like where I grew up. Literally that's the church parking lot that I was talking about. This is where I grew up. That's my home. My cousin now lives there. So that's my childhood home. You know, now they're mowing the lawn. They end up going to a pioneer village, like pretend it's closed, I couldn't get in. And then they end up like overlooking Salt Lake City. So it's this kind of absurd kind of look at, again, like this past and present kind of intersecting, and these kind of figures I almost see in a certain way kind of haunting the landscape, but also like they're not staying put there. It's almost like these, you know, almost like these little robots that are kind of like going and going. So that was the first kind of series that I made. And then after doing that, I was like, I actually really want, you know, that was playing with the stereotype, that was playing with like the imagery very directly that I'd grown up with, but it was still kind of like feeding into the stereotype in a way. And at that point I was like, actually, I want to know more. And like realizing like, even though I'd been raised on certain stories, they were all very generic stories. And I actually didn't know very much about the history of my family. So I started reading a lot about lots and lots of firsthand diary accounts. And I wanted to start to make new gestures. So this is I was very lucky. I have this really amazing fellowship at AIR Gallery, which is like the oldest feminist gallery in the United States that's still running. It's in Brooklyn. And I had a solo show there in 2013. And I showed the video, but then I actually really prefer the video projected because then they become very larger than life, which I really enjoy. But then I had like the sculptures nearby as well. And I started to kind of think about like I just didn't just think about it. I actually was like reading, like what are things that you would have been, what are gestures that these women would be doing? Again, like playing off of that very passive, you know, imagery of women, like what are some more active imagery? So I have cutting, oh, and by the way, so since this is ceramic, this is white stoneware with grog, fired to cone 6, unglazed. And it's 3 pieces and I glued the saw onto the hand. So that's how that worked. And yeah, so I have this image of, you know, with the saw, I have image with axes, and I kind of love this kind of implied, like something's happening, you're not quite sure what. I feel like all my artwork, it's like the beginning of a story and I'm gonna let you finish the story. Some of them are a little more playful. I mean, this is almost like, you know, I'm ripping off of like, you know, the dude under the car, you know, but it's like the woman in the car, you know, trying to fix her hand cart. And what would that look like? So I had a whole series of like images of like you know, this kind of generic pioneer woman, like, and like being active, doing work. And then I started to make other things. I'm like, oh, they're tired. What would happen? You know, so it's like, oh, they're lying down. They're talking to each other. And then, so yes, I'm queer. Came out when I was 21, 28 years ago. All my work, I love, someone said, your work is very quietly queer. And I said, I really like that, because it's like, I feel like it's just my life. It's like, I live a life, you know, there's no guy taking care of anything, you know, I am taking care of you know, so it's, you know, so people are like, oh, there's no men to take care of stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's my life. You know, it's like, no, there's no men, you know, that's a very queer women life. So I think about that, as well as thinking about actually doing all this research about my family. The women actually were on their own a lot of the time. So this actually is not, it actually is not weird that I have like all these women, and actually my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother were both single mothers living in frontier Utah. And so it's interesting for me to think about, I don't have much info on them, but to think about what their lives were like as well. But there is a little bit of, I do have a little bit of friendship and a little bit of romance. A little bit, I don't know, I call it intimacy of, you know, what would, so there's okay, going into the next project, actually, this will even kind of go more into it. So then I was like, I want to do something that's just like fully queer. I just got really excited, but I wanted to specifically use my great-grandfather's diary. So that, remember the one I told you about, James Bellamy Farmer, who came over from England? He kept a diary, really intense, several hundred pages long, from the year that his first wife died. So he's from England. He's working in a sock factory from the time he was a little kid. He joins the Mormon church when he's like 18 years old. His employer immediately kicks him out, not just of the factory, but out of, he lived with his employer. So he's now homeless, but he's got his like Mormon community. So he gets married, but his wife dies after a year, and then he takes on, he was very, you know, zealous in his religion, and he becomes like the first missionaries. He became a missionary, but what that meant back then is you're literally like, you're wandering around trying to convert people, but you don't have a place to stay. There's no structure. You're just wandering. So the diary starts with that. It starts with him wandering, and I've read the whole thing, and it's really intense. He actually spends a lot of time sleeping in fields in England, in the middle of nowhere. So it was like, oh, even before he like came to the United States, like that's what he was doing. And then there's the actual, you know, boat trip. And then you go up the Mississippi River, and then you start like the whole wagon train 3 months of walking across the plains. So it's really intense to have his diary and to read it. And I've been collecting bits and pieces, and I have this really long-term project, and I don't know when it will get finished because for so many reasons, but I've been kind of making up this kind of, I wanted to like go do one more video that was much more polished, that includes writing, but all of the writing is from his diary. And what he's noticing, and I go to the same places he went to, but it's just 2 women, and it's a love story of these 2 women. So I don't know, I have some beautiful photos from the series and some stills, and I've gone out 4 times by myself, and it's exhausting, it's intense to drive around Nebraska and Wyoming by myself with these little figures, trying to figure out where to do this where there aren't fences, which is really, really hard. And you can see some of the same figures that I made are the figures here. So again, that's a very long-term project that I really look forward to finishing someday. And this is a picture of me out in the middle of nowhere. My brother helped me with like one tiny little thing. So this is him taking a photo of me, just so you can see me out there in the middle of, actually it's outside of Saratoga, Wyoming. Switching back to my sculpture, since this was like this epic thing that I kind of launched, and I was like, okay, I actually want to actually make sculptures I can show on a regular basis. So I had the opportunity to make something for Governor's Island. If everybody knows, Governor's Island has all those different abandoned houses that are now art spaces. And I ended up, it was through AR Gallery, and I got the walkthrough closet, and I got really excited about doing something in a closet. So it was the first piece that I made using quilts. Now, I grew up with tide quilts. Tide quilts are a very Western American type of quilt. So Eastern American, you've got like the fancy ladies who are doing like the fancy, time consuming, they have leisure, little tight stitches. A lot of Western quilting is utilitarian, it's down and dirty, you gotta make it, it's gotta happen like quick. So tide quilts are often whole cloth quilts, and you just use this yarn and you just tie it just enough to hold the thing together. So that's what I grew up with. I had one of those quilts on my bed. Everyone I knew was just ubiquitous in Utah, like this kind of tide quilt. And from the time I was a kid, I would play with my little ceramic figurines on my bed and imagine them as landscape. So like literally, like this is part of my childhood play. So I got so excited about this walk-through closet because I was like, oh, I can finally do this thing that I've been thinking about forever. And this was like summer of 2014, and put together like the quilted landscape with ceramic figures. So the very first thing this is the first thing I did, and you can see it was kind of a top, and it kind of went in, and I had this little couple looking up at the stars, these little ghost figures, and then here they're like kind of working the land, and this is like at night. So I called it by day and by night. And then after this, literally 2 days after this went down, my appendix ruptured, ended up in the hospital, didn't make anything for 1.5 years, really intense recovery experience, but it gave me a lot of time to read and to think. And I basically from here have made 2 really big installations, which I'm going to be showing you, using this quilted landscape. And then I'm working on a 3rd, and I consider them like a series of 3. So in a weird way, it kind of bought me this like time to really kind of delve even deeper into some histories and thinking that I'd wanted to do. So I'm going to go back to the diary for a moment of my great-great-grandpa. I started to kind of like, again, pay attention to like, what are some of the things that you do like on this 3-month trip? Oh, and by the way, like just a myth, people think that you like rode a cover wagon, you rode in the wagon. You didn't ride in the wagon. All your stuff was in the wagon, you walked. So I just want you to, just as a lot of people don't know that, like you would have walked the whole 3 months, 12 hours a day for 3 months. And so the women were doing this with their really long dresses on, which are just crazy. And you're basically, I mean, his diary is like, had several hills to descend. This is in one day. You're gonna go up and down and up and down. You're gonna cross like 2 or 3 rivers, and the women are gonna be doing it in these dresses. And what I started to pay attention to as I kind of wrote out, this is the family. So all of these great-great-grandpa, great-great-grandma, grandpa, great-great-great, these are all people who did the pioneer trek in my family. And then I got to this person. This is Sarah Ellen Broadridge. She came in 1855 at the age of 20 by herself. I mean, kind of by herself. She was single. I mean, she was with a group of Mormon pioneers, but she was single. She left her family behind. And I was like, what in the world was this like for her? So I got really obsessed with this. I don't know much about her other than, she ended up in Utah, married James Melody farmer, and they had like 9 kids. That's kind of all I know about her. But the fact that like, who is she to have done that, to have like left her family behind and to have done this, and like, what would that be? So I wanted to make a whole installation kind of just thinking about like literally like that kind of like epic climbing up and down and climbing up and down. But I wanted to give her a companion. And this was in the Leslie Lemon Museum of Art, which is the one and only queer art museum in the whole world. And I really liked it because most people actually never read my work as queer, even if they are like intimate, like straight people usually they don't see it. They're like, because women can be like holding hands and no one reads it. So I really like this because it's like, oh, I can let them be a couple, like, and I don't even have to talk about it. It's just like, I'm just going to let them be like, but it's going to be more about like them helping each other. And I got really interested in this idea of, and I'm just going to say this was like one of the most ambitious things I've ever made. And it was intense. And I will share more about the process as I go, because I had to make 7 quilts, and these figures had to be perfectly, just like everything had to be perfect, like all the measurements, all of the gestures, in order for it to read well. So we have them, it's like, basically I call it like 4 scenes, like a 4-act play. And it starts out like not too hard, but it's like, and they take turns like helping each other, so we got you like, well, I don't know, you don't know, but like there's the sameness, you don't know who's who, right, in this, because they all look the same. But like you know, they're climbing, and then you have to jump. That's like the next one. And it's like, okay, you know, like in my head. And also there's something about the fragility of clay that when you see this in real life, there's a tension. So I just want to say that it's hard to see this, but when you actually see this, you're like, oh, I mean, there's a moment of like, oh, this could break at any moment. You know, this is just like so tenuous, like on the edge. I'll show you in a minute. There's actually bolts that hold it up, but I really love that tension of that fragility. She's got her arms out. And then the third one is, she's like, come on, you can do it. And then you look and actually your face, like a person's head would be around here. So you actually look up at them, and this is like a good several feet drop. So it's like this, like, all you have to do is cross it, but it's like, it gets more and more treacherous basically. And kind of like, whoa. And I really like this sense of like this journey. And it became this piece actually became a much more kind of metaphoric kind of piece about journeying in general. And then the very last image is and no, this is very interesting because I grew up with images of rock climbing. So to me, it was like, oh, they're climbing a rock. But people have read it and actually love this as well. The idea that they're actually pulling it down and they're going to tear down the whole thing. But either way, either they are trying to escape or they're going to tear it down. But either way, and I really love that in some ways it's a Western landscape, but in other ways it's also a domestic landscape. It's a quilted landscape. And this idea of women being stuck in a domestic landscape as well. So this piece became like something, I think, a little bit more queer and also a little bit more about women and women's roles. And just to show you I held like 10 quilting bees because there was no way I was going to do this all by myself. It was really intense. And so this is AIR Gallery let me do some there. But it was actually amazing because I grew up doing these big quilting bees as a kid. And so it let me kind of pass on knowledge of like, so it was actually a pretty amazing experience. And just in terms of logistics, I'm going to just show, this is what's holding it together. It's like all these bolts and all these like things. And then I have this really funny pillow system that I made. And I basically had to create like this landscape. And anyway, so it's kind of fun to see kind of what's underneath it. The very last thing I'm going to show you before I show you what's new is the last solo show that I did. It was the first time I actually had shown my work in Utah since I left in 1995. And it was 2018, and it was like 23 years. I left Utah at the age of 23. 23 years later, I went back and showed my art for the first time. So I'm not showing my work out there. So it was a really interesting experience to decide to very specifically like where I want to show the work, knowing that everyone's going to know the iconography, and actually most people there are going to have family that come from this. So I chose, this is Granary Arts, and they have this crazy log cabin gallery, and I was like, I have to make something for it. So I made very specifically a piece for that. And just going back to that guy, James Bellamy Farmer, he was actually one of the 23 men called by Brigham Young to start Fort Ephraim. So he was like one of the first white settlers in this area. So it also ties into my family history. So I'm going to show you a really bad photo, and then I'll show you a good photo, but just so you get a sense of like, it was hard to get all of these shots, but you can see like there were these 3 landscapes put together. So I'm going to really quickly share my website so you can just kind of see. So that's the outside. And for this piece, I actually wanted this to be, at this point I was like, actually, it was not so much about, I wasn't thinking about queerness and relationships so much. I mean, it could be there if you want it to be, but I was actually thinking very specifically about Utah history and Mormon history and the shifting of the landscape. And I call this series Looking Forward, Looking Back. And in some ways I kind of talk about it as like the beginning of the end of what was and the beginning of what is in the Western landscape. And you can see it's 3 parts, and it starts with the covered wagon, kind of like the, what's going on, the beginning, the beginning of basically white settlement out west. So I wanted to like capture like, what is this moment? What is this history? And how did they do it, what was going on, and thinking about what the women's work would be. So again, I did lots of reading. So cooking, you were, 3 times a day, you had to like carry these cast iron stoves and cook. So there's always 2 people doing stuff. They're working, getting water from the river constantly. And then there's always one person looking back towards the past and always one person looking forward towards the present. So it's kind of a past, present, future, looking towards the future. So the whole thing is kind of like capturing all of that at the same time. So we've got someone kind of looking ahead, maybe like what's going on, what's going to happen, where am I going? The second scene is the beginning of kind of the changing of the landscape. So this is a dugout, and the 2 people working, one of them is making the door for the dugout. One of them is planting seeds. So I'm starting to kind of cut into the landscape. And one of them's looking back, and it's starting to get a little more pensive, a little more like, where are we? What's going on? What's happening? And the one looking forward's got the laundry basket. So part of me is like that sense of like, oh, so once you like do this whole like wagon train, like what next? Like what comes next? Oh, it's like laundry day in, day out. Like what is this like women's work? And then the last scene is kind of like the beginning of like the cutting up of the landscape. So it's a beautiful quilt. It's a log cabin quilt. I'm really proud of it, but it's also, I'm hoping, to me, when in person, there's a moment of like, oh, the grasses are gone. Like it's kind of dead. It's kind of dead. It's like the beginning of like what has happened to the West, like the cutting up of the landscape. The rivers become the irrigation ditch, and there's 2 people working. They're like building the log cabins. They're being very industrious. But the person looking forward is kind of staring you down. So she's like literally kind of like, who are you? What happened? Like what? And then the person looking back is looking back at the first scene, and she's got her hand on her stomach. And to me, this is, I don't know, that's kind of how I feel like when I think about it, kind of my hand on my stomach. Yeah, so that was my last piece. And to give you a little bit more of context of where I'm going, I know time is going quickly. I told you my brother is a writer. If you want to read a really good book, specifically nonfiction about everything I've been talking about, but really in depth, he wrote this book called On Zion's Mount, Mormons, Indians, and the American Landscape, about those kind of first 10 years in Utah, like what went down, and then also kind of what has become, right? And also the shifting of the land and the shifting of the idea of landscape with these different cultures. And it's really good. It's a really searing look at displacement of Indigenous people. It came out in 2008. So it's just, anyway, it's great. It was published by Harvard Press. He's a historian at UPenn. So it's a really good book. So he always giving me things to read. This is a great book called How Women Made the West. And it was part of an exhibit. And it's just a really beautiful look at kind of women's history in the West, all the way up to the Puget Sound and New Mexico. And anyway, I just want to recommend that, like, I'm just barely touching the surface of like my family and my origin stories. And there are a million histories of the American West that need to be relooked at and need to be amplified, and especially a million different types of voices of women in the West. The last thing I'm going to show you is after that last project that I made at Greenwich Arts, I got involved in this quilting project, like for real. Well, it's like an embroidered quilting project, and it was a community-based project, and it took 200 hours. I've never done something quite like this before, but I want to do more of these. It's a quilted landscape, but it's like a map. It's actually a quilted landscape map. And again, thinking about the history of the land and how the built landscape on the land. And it was really important to me to start with like the land first. So Ephraim, Utah, those are like the most recent, but the Sandpitch Mountains and River, the Wasatch Plateau and Ephraim. And actually the river is now just totally it's an irrigation ditch. It's not even a river anymore, but like thinking about what was kind of versus what has become. And people made these little kind of like agricultural lands. There's a lot of farmland around that area. And I put it together, and then people put little kind of knots where it's important to them. And some people who helped me, there are 30 people that helped me with this. And some people, their family goes back generations, and some people had been in the United States for like 2 months. They were international students at Snow College. So it was like a really cool project to just think about time and history in like a very specific place that my family had been a part of. Okay, so what I'm working on right now, this is from the History Channel. Going back to kind of like this story of like this pioneer trail. The trail was littered with discarded supplies, furniture, clothing, personal items. It was a mess. It was a trash dump. And that's something that I've read about for, I guess, the past decade now. And I've always I wanted to visualize this, like, what does that look like? Again, this kind of like intersection of like this kind of Euro-American culture suddenly coming and like dumping their stuff in the landscape. But then also like how, like this, like, I don't know, I keep thinking, I was talking to Caitlin, I feel sad on all sides, you know, like I'm sad that they're like dumping their furniture, but then I'm like so sad that like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to this place? And, you know, the beginning of like, again, the beginning of displacement. So I have been making little, I don't know if you want to like make me big. I've been making little furniture that is going to be discarded trail trash furniture. So there we go. This is a little miniature dresser drawer that will be on its side. This is a rocking chair that really rocks. And again, all of these are based on photos, which I'll share in a second. A little chair. A little pitcher and bowl, a little pinch pot. Oh, see if I can get that. And I don't know if there will be people or not. I won't know until I make it. But if there are people, they might be doing something kind of absurd, like trying to sweep up the mess, which is not going to work. So I've been making little sweepers. I've got another one in progress. Oh, and I also want some things that are a little more falling apart. So I've been making a set of dresser drawers. You can see it's got little details on it. And the very last thing I'll do is I'll show you my source imagery, because it's all coming from real places, from these big pioneer museums that happen. This one's in Salt Lake City. So the dresser is based off of this dresser right here. The rocking chair and the other chair, I kind of like merged the two together to make this one. The bowl and the bowl and pitcher right here. And the other chair is based off of this chair right here. So really thinking about things that actually did make it probably across the plains, and that kind of ended up in this museum. And the last thing, and so yeah, I have like some more photos in case people couldn't see very well of some of the things. And the last thing I'm going to share actually is, I think after I do this, I'm going to go back to more personal. I kind of go back and forth between kind of these bigger mythic and then like personal. I found my great-great-grandmother's knitted lace in this museum, and it just kind of threw me whoa, like, yeah, just the reality, like, again, to go from like the mythology to the reality. And then this is the one that kind of killed me, was the carders, because you were doing everything. You were like growing the cotton, or, you know, shearing the sheep, and then you were like carding the wool or the cotton, and then spinning your own thread, and then you were making your own clothes. You were doing the entire thing. And this was another great-great-grandmother, Rebecca Hammer, and that was her wool carder. And that, again, just kind of like, whoa, like kind of threw me to see this actual thing. So I'm just going to kind of stop there with kind of, you know, personal to the big mythologies to back to the personal again.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Great work, Rachel.
Thanks. I've known Angela for a while.
Well, it's a little after 6, everyone. So I'm just gonna say, thank you to Rachel for a wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.